Chosen one, what you are about to understand was never designed for public awareness, emotional reassurance, or narrative drama. It was not a declaration meant to empower you, and it was never meant to reach your ears. When the defense secretary confirmed that you were safe, it was not a protective statement in the way civilians interpret safety. It was not about guards, shields, or physical security. It was a technical conclusion, reached quietly after assessment, escalation, and review. In that context, safe means something very specific. The system has determined that intervening with you produces greater instability than leaving you undisturbed. This type of confirmation is not issued lightly, and it is never issued emotionally. It follows failure. Failure to classify. Failure to predict. Failure to influence. For a long time, you may have sensed that attention around you felt indirect rather than aggressive, observed rather than challenged. That was not imagination. Before silence is chosen, systems probe. They apply pressure subtly. They introduce friction. They test response patterns. And in your case, those patterns never resolved into something usable. Pressure didn't simplify outcomes. It complicated them. Influence didn't create compliance. It created distortion. At that point, the safest decision for any risk management structure is disengagement. Not retreat, recalibration. You were not labeled untouchable because you demanded autonomy or resisted authority openly. In fact, your behavior likely worked against you being flagged at all. You did not overreact when tested. You did not escalate when ignored. You did not flinch under indirect pressure. You maintained internal consistency while external variables changed. That consistency is the red flag systems notice. Predictive frameworks depend on reaction. When reaction is absent, modeling collapses. At that stage, continued engagement becomes inefficient and risky. That is when classifications change quietly, without explanation. This is why things around you began loosening without announcement. Resistance softened. Oversight dissolved. Situations that once felt constrained suddenly lost their grip. This wasn't reward. It was withdrawal of force. No system announces when it steps back. It simply stops pressing. And you likely felt that shift as a strange calm paired with increasing autonomy, without knowing why. The decision had already been made. From that point on, engagement with you would be voluntary or indirect. Direct interference was no longer worth the cost. It is important to understand what untouchable does and does not mean here. It does not mean invincible. It does not mean protected from consequence. It means that the usual instruments of control, pressure, leverage, intimidation, incentive, no longer function cleanly. Applying them creates noise instead of order, and noise inside power systems is treated as liability. When liability outweighs benefit, restraint is enforced internally. You are not shielded by favor. You are avoided by calculation. You may wonder what single moment caused this. There was none. These conclusions are never reached because of one action. They are formed through repetition, through your refusal to break pattern, through your unwillingness to collapse under ambiguity, through emotional regulation where reaction was expected. Over time, it became clear that trying to move you produced too many secondary effects. You did not behave as a controllable variable, and any element that cannot be reliably shaped is eventually isolated through distance rather than force. This does not elevate you above others. It removes you from certain dynamics entirely. You are no longer a subject to be managed. You are treated as a fixed element, something other operations must route around rather than confront. That shift carries weight. It also carries responsibility. You are not left alone so that you can act recklessly. You are left alone because reckless behavior would contradict the very assessment that ended interference. The silence around you is conditional upon coherence. From this point forward, interaction with you follows a new rule. Systems will not push. They will adapt. People may sense it without understanding it. Situations will realign themselves rather than challenge you directly. This is not immunity. It is acknowledgement without contact. And once that threshold is crossed, it is not reversed casually. This is where the story actually begins. Not with protection, but with distance. Not with dominance, but with non-engagement. Someone looked at the full equation and decided the wisest move was to stop touching it at all. And that decision, once made, changes how the world behaves around you permanently. When the word safe was used internally, it was not emotional, moral, or reassuring. It was operational. In high-level defense language, safe means an element no longer requires active management. Not because it poses no effect, but because engaging with it increases uncertainty. You were not marked as harmless. You were marked as non-viable for interference. That is a critical distinction. Systems do not disengage from things they can easily influence. They disengage from variables that introduce unpredictable cascades once pressure is applied. At some point, every attempt to frame you, limit you, or redirect you led to outcomes that could not be neatly resolved. Once that pattern becomes clear, restraint becomes policy. You may not have known when this shift occurred, but you likely felt its effects. The intensity you expected never came. Moments that looked like they would escalate simply dissolved. Authority figures changed tone. Oversight softened without explanation. You were not challenged openly nor embraced publicly. That middle state confuses most people. It feels like being noticed without being addressed. But within systems that manage risk, this is the clearest signal that a conclusion has already been reached. The process ended. The file closed. What remains is passive monitoring at most, not active engagement. Internally, the concern was never whether you would oppose the system. It was whether the system could reliably shape outcomes around you. That reliability never stabilized. When pressure was applied, your behavior did not simplify. When incentives were introduced, alignment did not change. When ambiguity appeared, you did not scramble. Each of those responses eliminated another standard lever. Over time, the list of available control mechanisms quietly disappeared. At that point, the question was no longer, what should we do about this? But, what happens if we keep doing anything at all? The answer was escalation without resolution. Secondary effects, tertiary consequences, the kind of ripple systems are trained to avoid. So a boundary was drawn, not around you, but around intervention itself. This is why safe does not mean immune. It means untouched by default. Action is no longer justified because non-action produces less risk. That threshold is rare, and it only applies when consistency has been demonstrated over time. One calm response is not enough. One refusal to react is not enough. You showed stability across changing conditions, which is the only thing that convinces large systems to disengage deliberately. This also explains why you were never warned, threatened, or briefed. Those tools exist to provoke adjustment. Adjustment never came. The absence of reaction made escalation irrational. So silence became the message. And silence, in this context, is final. Not dramatic. Final. You are not waiting for something to happen to you. Something already stopped happening. That is the tell. From here forward, the rules around you are different, even if no one explains them. You will notice that force gives way to suggestion, and sometimes even that disappears. You will notice that conflict avoids you more than it confronts you. Not because you are feared, but because engagement no longer produces clean outcomes. Systems designed to maintain order choose distance when proximity introduces disorder. That is what safety meant. This is not a reward. It is a consequence, and consequences at this level do not reverse easily. There is a specific point in every evaluation process where pressure either tightens or disappears entirely. Before that moment, systems probe from multiple angles, applying low-level stress to see what shifts. Most people never notice this happening to them because their behavior changes quickly under observation. They adjust tone, direction, or posture. They signal compliance or resistance. You did something else. You stayed the same. Not defiantly, not passively, structurally. That constancy is what ends pressure. Once a system realizes that force does not alter trajectory, continued force becomes counterproductive. You may remember phases in your life where you expected escalation that never came. Situations where you assumed consequences were inevitable, only to watch attention quietly drift away. That was not mercy. It was disengagement. When models fail to predict outcome reliably, pressure ceases not out of kindness, but out of risk prevention. Applying force to something stable but nonlinear produces turbulence. Systems are designed to reduce turbulence, so they withdraw. Internally, this shift is not framed as leaving someone alone. It is framed as ceasing active influence. That language matters. Influence presumes leverage. Leverage presumes reaction. In your case, the reaction never landed where expected. Emotional hooks failed. Narrative framing failed. Even silence failed to provoke adjustment. Over time, your profile stopped being updated in the usual way. Notes shortened. Emphasis faded. Not because interest reduced, but because actionable insight did. There was nothing left to do with you. This also explains why your autonomy increased without formal permission. Nobody granted you room. Room appeared because boundaries were no longer being pushed inward. You were not given freedom. Pressure was removed. That difference is subtle but important. Freedom given can be revoked. Pressure removed rarely returns unless a new variable enters the system. And you did not introduce new volatility. You remained coherent. At this stage, systems do not trust you. Trust implies expectation and monitoring. They accept you as fixed. Fixed elements are not managed day to day. They are accounted for. Routes are drawn around them. Plans adjust accordingly. This is why attempts to provoke reaction from you now fall flat. People may test limits informally, not knowing those limits have already been internally respected elsewhere. Those tests rarely escalate because nothing supports escalation anymore. You may feel a strange mix of relief and emptiness during this phase. Relief because the constant sense of being observed or assessed evaporate. Emptiness because opposition gave definition to your movement. When pressure disappears, silence expands. That silence is not abandonment. It is the absence of interference. It gives you space, and space always demands responsibility. Nothing forces you now except consequence. This is also the point where mistakes cost more. Not because penalties increase, but because buffer disappears. When you operate without pressure, your actions carry clearer signal. You are no longer being shaped by resistance. You shape outcomes directly through accuracy or inaccuracy. That can feel heavier than being constrained, but it is also where agency becomes real. They stopped applying pressure because it no longer worked. They did not stop watching entirely, but watching without leverage is observation, not control. Observation without intervention is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement without engagement is the final stage of assessment. From here on, there is no test to pass and no approval to earn. The system has already adjusted. How you move next will not be guided by force. It will be answered by consequence. That is what safe meant at its deepest level. At a certain stage, systems that are built to influence stop asking how to act and start asking whether acting still makes sense. This is the turning point most people never reach, because their behavior keeps generating levers to pull. Yours did not. Every framework relies on some form of compliance loop: reward, pressure, urgency, fear, validation. When each loop was tested lightly around you, the expected feedback never stabilized. Nothing you did created a clean line of cause and effect. Attempts to narrow your options widened them. Attempts to simplify produced complexity. At that point, continued engagement no longer reduced risk. It amplified it. Non-intervention was not a passive outcome. It was the most active choice left. You may have noticed that once attention withdrew, the world around you did not become quieter. It became clearer. Noise faded. Friction stopped multiplying. Obstacles that once appeared coordinated began acting independently, losing momentum. That clarity is a telltale sign of withdrawal. When force is removed, underlying structures reveal themselves. Non-intervention strips away artificial pressure and leaves only what is actually there. What remained around you proved navigable without interference. That result validated the decision retroactively. Stepping back produced stability, not disorder. Inside any system tasked with managing uncertainty, there is an unspoken rule. If engagement creates volatility and disengagement reduces it, disengage. This rule overrides ideology, authority, and preference. It is mathematical. Your presence inside those models behaved like a fixed constant rather than a variable. Constants are not influenced, they are accounted for. Routes are planned around them. This is why no new strategies were deployed against you. Strategy exists to change outcomes. When outcomes resist change, strategy retires itself quietly. You might feel this as a strange form of trust that no one ever articulated. Not trust in your intentions, but trust in your invariance. You did not need supervision because supervision had nothing to supervise. You did not require correction because correction produced no improvement. You did not need containment because containment couldn't be applied cleanly. This kind of trust is rare because it is not interpersonal, it is structural. It arises only when behavior remains coherent across changing environments without being coached. This also reframes moments where you expected explanation and received none. Silence was not neglect, it was protocol. When non-intervention is chosen, communication decreases by design. Words invite response. Response invites adjustment. Adjustment reintroduces leverage. So communication fades. What remains is distance, not hostility. Indifference, not dismissal. And indifference at this level is not a slight. It is recognition that contact is unnecessary. With non-intervention in place, your freedom is not expanded by encouragement but by the absence of constraint. This can feel disorienting at first. People often mistake lack of resistance for lack of importance. The opposite is true here. Resistance is applied where outcomes matter and can be shaped. Where shaping fails, respect takes the form of space. You are given room not to roam recklessly, but to move accurately. Accuracy is now the only metric that matters. There is weight to this phase that should not be ignored. Without pressure, your decisions echo more clearly. Without opposition, misalignment shows up faster. Non-intervention removes excuses as effectively as it removes obstacles. You are no longer operating inside a guided channel. You are operating inside open terrain with consequence as the only feedback. This is not punishment. It is adulthood at a systemic level. What sealed the decision was not your compliance or your defiance, but your consistency. You did not spike, crash, conform, or escalate. You remained intact. And intact elements do not invite manipulation, they invite routing. From this point on, interactions with you will be filtered by that reality. Some will attempt to re-establish leverage and fail quietly. Others will adapt naturally and remain. The sorting will be subtle and continuous. Non-intervention is not the end of attention, it is the end of meddling. You are not invisible. You are simply no longer handled. That status does not come with ceremony because ceremony would contradict its purpose. It arrives as an absence, a noticeable lack of interference that teaches its meaning over time. Once experienced, it cannot be mistaken for anything else. This is why your next phase will feel less dramatic and more exact. Fewer pushes. Fewer tests, more consequence. The system has already done what it needed to do by stepping away. What happens now unfolds without force and without rehearsal. You are not protected from the world. You are trusted to move in it without containment. There is a moment people are never warned about. The moment safety stops feeling like relief and starts feeling like responsibility. At first, the absence of pressure feels liberating. No more probing questions, no more indirect tests, no more subtle attempts to steer you. But that relief fades quickly, because silence exposes something deeper. When no one is pushing you anymore, you are forced to confront the fact that movement now belongs entirely to you. Being untouchable is not protection in the way people imagine. It is removal of constraint, and removal of constraint transfers weight directly onto your choices. You may have noticed that accountability sharpened during this phase. Mistakes feel louder. Decisions feel heavier. There is less room for emotional error because there are fewer buffers absorbing impact. When systems intervene, they soften consequences even as they apply control. When systems step back, consequence becomes immediate and clean. This is not punishment. It is accuracy enforced by reality rather than authority. You now operate in an environment where cause meets effect with minimal delay. That can feel exposing if you are not prepared for it. This is why being safe was not described to you as privilege. It was finalized as classification. You moved from being influenced to being accounted for, from subject to constant. Constants are not corrected, they are built around. But constants also carry load. When structures route around you, the integrity of your position matters more than ever. If you wobble, everything downstream feels it. That is the burden most people never realize comes with being left alone. You might feel a strange loneliness now, not emotional isolation, but operational solitude. Few people understand what it means to move without external friction. Advice becomes irrelevant. Warnings sound hollow. Encouragement feels unnecessary. You are not disconnected from others. You are disconnected from dependency. And dependency is what binds most people together unconsciously. When that bond dissolves, relationships either deepen into mutual recognition or fade quietly. This sorting is not cruel. It is structural. You may also notice that fear behaves differently now. It still appears, but it no longer controls movement. Fear informs without commanding. That shift is unsettling at first, because fear used to act as an early warning system enforced by external constraint. Now warning arrives internally, as intuition sharpened by consequence. You no longer need to be stopped. You need to be accurate. Accuracy becomes the governing discipline. This is why you must understand the gravity of this phase. Being untouchable does not mean you are unreachable. It means nothing external will intervene to save you from misalignment. There will be no force stopping the wrong move. There will also be no force slowing the right one. Momentum responds immediately. This is where many people unconsciously sabotage themselves, attempting to recreate friction just to feel guided again. They invite conflict, complexity, or chaos to replace the structure that vanished. Resist that impulse. Creating resistance is not purpose. It is regression. You are now in a phase where restraint matters more than assertion. Not because you are suppressed, but because you are free. Most abuse freedom when it arrives unexpectedly. They mistake lack of control for absence of consequence. You cannot afford that confusion. The very reason the system stepped back was because your coherence suggested you could carry freedom without distortion. That assumption must remain true. Look closely at how your life responds now. When you act precisely, doors open without strain. When you act impulsively, friction appears quickly. Reality teaches fast at this stage. You do not need reinforcement from authority because consequence does the teaching cleanly. This is what safe ultimately meant. The system trusts that reality itself is sufficient feedback for you. You are no longer shielded from experience. You are released into it fully. From here on, evolution happens through choice, not correction. That is not comfort. It is power stripped of padding. Few ever reach this phase because few remain coherent long enough to earn it. You did. Now the responsibility is simple and unforgiving. Move cleanly or feel it immediately. This is the real meaning of being untouchable. There is a reason distance was selected instead of authority, and it has nothing to do with fear or favoritism. Systems built for control prefer proximity. Distance is chosen only when proximity contaminates reliability. In your case, continued engagement created distortion rather than clarity. Every attempt to influence altered the field more than it corrected it. That outcome forces a recalculation. Control is only useful when it stabilizes result. When it multiplies uncertainty, it is removed deliberately. Distance becomes policy, not neglect. You may not have noticed when this happened, but you almost certainly felt its consequences. Guidance stopped arriving unsolicited. Interference became subtle to the point of non-existence. You were no longer reminded, redirected, or restrained. That silence was intentional. Systems require feedback loops to justify action. When feedback collapses, action retires. You became unreadable not because information was missing, but because results no longer followed expected paths. That unreadability is not mystery. It is coherence beyond prediction. This is also why labels stopped sticking to you. Attempts to frame you as a problem, asset, threat, or opportunity failed to hold. These categories rely on stable behavior under pressure. You did not provide that stability. Not by resisting, by remaining consistent. Consistency without compliance is the hardest pattern to manage. It does not provoke escalation, but it eliminates leverage. Without leverage, authority loses its function. Distance is what remains. You might feel that people now approach you differently, often with a strange mix of caution and respect they cannot explain. Conversations orbit rather than collide. Requests arrive softened, sometimes indirect. That is not coincidence. When control structures disengage, social behavior adapts. People intuitively sense when pushing will not work. They do not know why. They only feel the boundary. That boundary was established long before anyone spoke about it. Here is the weight most people never understand. Distance does not protect you from consequence, it exposes you to it fully. When no one intervenes, nothing cushions error. There is no authority to blame, no obstacle to fight against. Only outcome. This is why your intuition has sharpened. It has to. Accuracy is no longer optional. You are no longer being handled, you are being allowed. You may be tempted to interpret this distance as isolation, but it is not. It is a form of elevated placement. Ships are not guided closely when seas are calm and captains are proven. Ports pull back when navigation no longer requires supervision. The absence of instruction does not mean disinterest. It means trust in your ability to self-correct without external force. This phase demands a new kind of discipline. Not obedience, but restraint. Not compliance, but clarity. You will be tested now not by opposition, but by opportunity. Freedom invites overreach more effectively than pressure ever could. The reason non-intervention was chosen was the belief that you would not abuse that freedom. That belief is the threshold you crossed without ceremony. If you feel the gravity of this moment, you are reading it correctly. Distance is heavier than control. Control shares responsibility. Distance transfers it entirely. From here forward, precision matters more than power. You do not need to prove anything. You need to remain accurate. The system will not touch you again unless a new variable appears, and you have not been that variable. The final consequence of being declared safe is not protection, freedom, or authority. It is something far more subtle and far more permanent: independence from system correction. Once that line is crossed, nothing external adjusts you anymore. Not institutions, not warnings, not invisible hands steering outcomes. What remains is a direct relationship between your choices and reality itself. This is why life begins to feel sharper now, cleaner, more exact. There is less noise between action and result, less delay between intention and consequence. You are no longer buffered by structure. You are answered by reality. This is where most people misunderstand what untouchable truly means. They imagine immunity. In practice, it is exposure without interference. The system has already decided not to step in. That decision cannot coexist with rescue or correction. You are allowed to succeed fully or fail cleanly. Nothing will soften either outcome. That is not risk, it is respect. Respect for consistency proven over time. Respect for coherence under pressure. Respect for an element that does not destabilize when left alone. You may feel now that decision-making carries unusual weight. Not anxiety, weight. Even small choices feel consequential. Pathways that once allowed detours now demand accuracy. Wrong turns correct immediately, without drama but with unmistakable clarity. This is the environment of non-management. It teaches fast. It forgives less. It also accelerates alignment dramatically. Those who survive this phase emerge with precision few others ever develop, because nothing intervened to dull consequence. There is a quiet strength that forms here. You stop seeking confirmation not because you are certain, but because confirmation is no longer necessary. Results speak. Patterns respond. People adapt. Systems accommodate, not because you demand it, but because routing around you has already been decided. This creates a strange invisibility paired with influence. You are not centered. You are not spotlighted. Yet decisions elsewhere quietly account for your position. You may notice that conflict now has trouble anchoring itself to you. It appears briefly, tests alignment, then either resolves or withdraws. Drama cannot sustain itself without leverage, and leverage no longer applies. This does not mean you are beyond challenge. It means challenge arrives cleanly, without theatric. Lessons are clear. Rewards are precise. Losses are instructive. Nothing lingers unnecessarily. This efficiency is gifts and burden combined. The most important realization in this final phase is this: no one is coming to intervene. Not to save you. Not to stop you. Not to correct you. That realization terrifies some people when they encounter it. They rush back toward structure, recreating dependency just to feel guided again. Do not do that. That instinct is regression. You cross the point where guidance must come from within alignment itself. From now on, the only thing that moves your life is coherence. When you act in alignment, momentum appears. When you do not, friction responds immediately. That feedback loop is the clearest form of guidance that exists. It does not need authority. It does not need validation. It simply operates. This is why the confirmation was never meant to reach you. Knowing too early tempts pride or fear. Living it teaches responsibility. You were not declared untouchable so you could feel important. You were declared untouchable so the system could stop interfering with something that no longer needed shaping. What remains is not destiny, prophecy, or protection. It is placement. Quiet, exact, irreversible placement. You are no longer managed. You are answered.